Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name's Ted, Head of Engineering at Prospa, which is down in Sydney. And what I want to talk to you today about is 5 things that I'm doing wrong with remote teams. And by doing wrong, what I really mean is 5 things that sort of go against conventional wisdom, that I've often heard told that you have to do it a certain way. And I've kind of decided that, rather than just take that as received wisdom, to challenge it and to see what happens. And I think I've been successful in some of these ideas. So a little bit about my background. Software engineer to start with, moved into leadership about 15 years ago. And from the very beginning, I've been leading distributed teams based on sort of various companies I've been in. I've always seemed to have distributed teams. Even when there's only like 1 or 2, I would end up being the one that would get it. And I've led teams that have been based in Milan, in Austin, in Texas, in Wrocław, Manila, Adelaide, San Francisco, and more. So even more than that. And in doing so, I've basically had a lot of experience in trying to figure out how to do all of these different teams. And so what I want to talk to you today, did I get enough? Sorry. I even led a distributed team in Sydney before I moved to Sydney, which was interesting. So living in Texas, running a team in Sydney, and then moving to Sydney and running a team back in Texas. So they just couldn't decide where they wanted me. So a lot of times when a company decides to go with a distributed team, and quick note of terminology, I don't usually use offshore team because I don't really like that. It's distributed team because they're either remote team, they're part of the organization. But most of the time when I was dealing with this, the number one reason that people would say that you need to use a remote team is cost savings. Right? They're cheaper. You can get a team in India or Manila for pennies on the dollar. And it's just not really a good reason to do it because you're going to have all kinds of problems. You're going to end up, and I'll go through a little bit later, you're going to end up with a lot of costs that mean that you're really not going to save as much as maybe you think. So when we were looking at a previous company of mine, we were going to do a team in Manila. And the main reason we were going to be doing a team in Manila is because the CEO said, I want a distributed team. Like no other reason, it's just he heard that's what good software companies did, so that's what he wanted to do. Fortunately, I was able to push back until we were able to be a lot more mature. But when we started researching, we've got this slide deck from a vendor. And it says in there, as you can see, you can save 80% on salaries, 100% on benefits or on payroll taxes, on workers' comp, which is really kind of scary if you're saving 100% on workman's comp. Tells you how they wanted to treat the employees. On the benefits, and how much stuff costs. So as you can see, you're going to save quite a bit of money. And I'm not sure if they actually believed any of those numbers or not. But the fact is, you're never going to save that kind of money. It just doesn't work that way. So when I set up the team, I finally got around to convincing the CEO is that we don't use it as a cost savings. We do it primarily to find talented developers. It's very, very difficult to find enough really good developers if you limit yourself to a single geography, such as either Sydney or Austin or wherever you happen to be. Especially when in Sydney we're competing against Google and Atlassian and all these other companies that just have an ability to just sort of take up all the oxygen in the room when you're looking for talent. So we decided to go farther afield and we looked for finding developers. So that really changed our philosophy on how we go about this. Because if you're not using it as a cost saver, then you don't start skimping when you're trying to build things up later. You will have a lot of hidden costs with a remote team. You need travel, right? You're going to have to go to visit them, have them come to visit you, go and see the office. If you're not traveling at all, then you're probably doing it really wrong because you're not going to have that sort of connection. Now, if you're going to have not just people working from home, but actually a distributed office, you're going to have now twice as much or many times as much cost. So you've got to have facilities, you've got to have hardware, you've got to have office supplies, you've got to have furniture, all of these things that you have to build up. Now, if you're using it primarily as a cost savings, you're going to skimp on these things and you're going to give them like really crappy 10-year-old laptops and then wonder why you're not productive. And that's just, so you don't want to have that mindset of being a cost savings. Recruiting costs money, especially if you have to fly over to do in-person interviews. So you're going to have to do a lot of training including language skills, depending on where you're going. Even in countries that have really, really good English language backgrounds, it's still a second language, and so you still want to do some training to make sure that you can get as much as possible out of the developers. Communication equipment, and I'll touch this a lot more on this later, but again, if you skimp on communication equipment, you're going to have a really hard time trying to make sure that they're productive. Potentially, you might have incorporation overhead. So if you decide that you don't want to continue to use a partner and you want to build it, then you're going to have sort of taxes and lawyer fees and all kinds of things like that. So it does add to complexity. And finally, talent. Really good talent still costs money. So if you're saving 85% on your salaries from Sydney, you're going to be finding some very, very junior, very unskilled developers that are going to be joining your team. And it's going to end up being more expensive because you're going to have to do everything 2 or 3 times. You're going to have to explain things multiple times. And so you really don't want to do that. Now, one of the things I want to say is that I'm not going to stand up here and say you absolutely won't save any money, right? It is entirely possible that after you do all these things, even for accounting for this, you do have somewhat of a reduced budget. But if you go at it with that as a mindset, if that's your goal, you're going to skimp on all of these things, and you're not going to be successful with your distributed team. So the second thing that I've often heard is that people tell us, but we've got different cultures in these different locations, so you really need to have a different management style, and you need to tailor that management style to that particular place. So you should treat your Sydney developers as one thing, treat your Manila developers, and have a different management style there. Well, at my current company, we have developers that are born in all of these different countries. And the thing is that all of them on that list are actually in the Sydney office. So we already have a wide range of people. We already have a wide range of cultures, of languages, of different kinds of skill. And so to my mind, it's not a good idea to say, okay, I'm going to have this one team managed one way and another team managed another way. Instead, as developers or as development leaders and engineering managers, we have to tailor it to the individuals. So you can tailor it to the particular people and understand that you're going to have different cultures, you're going to have different languages, different skills, regardless of where it is. So if you get good at doing it in your home office, then you can adjust and have a better management style for your distributed team and be able to understand sort of their challenges. Sorry. And it should be tailored to the people, not to the location. And I think that's really important. And you combine that with, again, your previous thing where you're not trying to save costs, so you're going over and you're visiting and you're investing in training and you're really spending the money on your distributed team as well as your local team. That allows you to have everybody treated as equals, which I think is vitally important. One of the things that you can do when you're trying to do this around having a sort of a similar style across different locations is that you need to make sure that you have autonomy across these locations because you can't be in all of the different places at the same time. And if you sit there and try to say you're going to dictate to your distributed team exactly how they're going to do something, you're going to get into that cycle where you'll tell them to do something, they're not going to quite understand, they're going to have to wait till the next day to ask you the questions to please clarify it, at which point you've lost 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours as you're trying to get it. So you have to be able to trust your distributed team as much as you trust your local team, and to do that, you need to make sure you have autonomy. You need to make sure that you're allowing for the developers to be able to make decisions. Now, what's that going to do, as we've talked about earlier, it means sometimes things are going to mess up. You're going to have failures. You're going to have them implement the wrong thing. But that's okay. Put guardrails in place. Put safety rails up so that they can have that autonomy and make those decisions. You need to also have training and opportunity available in both locations. We had an interesting thing when at my previous company. We had a developer who wanted English language training. And I found it really curious because he spoke very, very good English. And so I was asking him, how come you want English language? I've never heard you sort of struggle with it. And he's like, you only hear the ideas that I have that I know I can express in English. I have other ideas that I want to express, but I don't know the English words for them, so they never come out. And to me, that was just a light bulb moment. I never even thought of that. So you want to make sure that you're allowing that, because that it unlocks a lot of potential for the different team members. You also want to ensure that you have a shared vision, because autonomy without a shared vision is just chaos, right? Because then people are just doing whatever they want. So you've got to make sure that the distributed team understands it. Now, the good thing about this is that if you're doing that, you're also spending a lot of time making sure that you have a vision, because you can't share it if you don't have it. So you get it clarity, which means that your local management practices then get improved, because you've got autonomy locally, and you've got that shared vision locally. And finally, you want to make sure that you set clear expectations for everyone in the organization. And this is really vital because, as again, the time for the feedback loop becomes extended when they're in different locations, especially if they're in completely different time zones. If they're an hour or two away, it's not as bad. But when you're in Sydney and your team's in Poland and New York and San Francisco, and there's never a time that everyone's in the office at the same time, you want to make sure everyone's got a clear understanding. One strategy that we used for this was we created a manifesto. And I stole this idea about 4 CTO summits ago from Simon Rack-Allen, who did it for his teams. And so we sit there and we talk about how we make things. We talk about how we function as a team. And we talk about how we operate. And now, the individual bullet points on this really are not that important, right? I mean, each person wants to, you should do this in your own context for your own company. If you try to do it with just these, you're going to have a bad time. But what it does do is it allows for people to be able to make decisions, right? If everybody on the team agrees that this is how we make a decision, this is what we value, this is how we go about doing stuff, then when they make those decisions in the autonomous place, in an autonomous manner, they've got some guidelines. They've got at least some guardrails to say, this is how we think, this is how we operate. If I'm going to make a choice between A or B, then I look on, okay, which of the A or B do we agree on as a team that we agree to follow these rules. And it's important, again, that we do this because if you're trying to rely simply on clarity of instructions, if you don't give people like autonomy and guidelines, you just say, well, I got an idea, we'll make sure we're super, super clear on the requirements. We'll spend an extra week writing it out. We'll make absolutely 100% sure everyone understands it. It'll be written down. There'll be no problems. And so you get requirements. And of course, you can still have misunderstandings. Glad it worked. The last talk I did, that slide fell flat, which wasn't fun. So you really, really want to make sure that you're not relying on simply just written communication or verbal communication or anything like that. That you give people the ability to make decisions rather than dictating to them and hoping that they understand it correctly. So the next one that we often hear as a particular thing is that you can use free communication tools. I mean, there's a lot of them out there right now. You've got Skype. You've got just all sorts of things that you can have on your laptop. Slack does come with the free version and everything. And remember, you have to rely on these free communication tools because at the start we've said that this is all about saving money. So we're going to save money, so we're going to make sure that we don't spend any on communications. We want to rely on free communication tools and built-in systems. If you try this, you're really going to have a bad time because one of the biggest challenges that you'll find with running distributed teams, as I'm sure everyone here who's done it knows, is the communication is very, very difficult and very, very important. And so if you're doing it just on communication, free communication tools, you start off like this. If you've just got 2 people, you can use these tools. It'll work adequately enough. But then you hire a couple more people. You've got multiple locations, multiple teams. Things start to get a little bit more complicated, and trying to rely on free tools really becomes problematic. It just doesn't give you the amount of flexibility that you need. It doesn't give you the amount of communication that you need in order to be successful. So in the last couple of companies I've been at, we don't rely on free communication tools because, again, we're not trying to save money. We're trying to build really good software. So first off, and this I cannot stress highly enough, is invest in high-quality video conferencing tools. So get good cameras, get good microphones, get good monitors, get good locations that you can have sort of these calls with remote teams. I don't know how many people here have been on a remote call where you're the person who's actually distributed, and you can sort of kind of hear every third word every now and again, and the picture's all fuzzy, and everybody, you're sitting there. The classic one is two people are talking to you, and they're using their laptop and Skype, so you see the half of this face and then half of the other faces. They're both sitting on sort of next to each other, and the camera's going right down the middle of it. It's just a really terrible experience. So invest in really high quality video conferencing tools. Currently at Prospa, we've got like really, really nice TVs with Zoom rooms built in so that you can fire up a meeting, which is single touch. They're smart TVs, so we can sit there and draw on the TV, and the person on the other side will see it. So when you make that mistake of pointing to your screen, it actually is effective because it actually like highlights it where on the screen you're pointing to, which is really nice. And it allows for just that feeling that the person's in the room. You have that ability to really sort of just talk to somebody right away. And you can, I was having a conversation just before this talk talking about how one of the big problems is that you really can't just sort of have that almost organic-like conversation where you can just tell somebody, hey, can I just talk to you for 5 minutes? Yes, I can. When you have something set up that's good, you actually can do that. You can sit there, yes, it's still a little bit awkward because you have to type it out on Skype saying, do you have 5 minutes? But then you can just walk into the room, tap the button, everybody's talking, everybody can understand each other, you can collaborate, you can screen share. It's really, really effective. Document sharing, annotations, real-time pair programming, all of that becomes a lot easier when you do it. And the nice thing about this is that it actually improves your local team's communications habits. Because now, excuse me, now you have to spend a lot of time saying, okay, well, I need to make sure that the team in Manila knows where I'm at, so I'm going to update my Slack status. And I'm not just going to assume that people can see me at my desk. And then people who are working from home that day, or people who are just on a different floor, then become much better at understanding where things are, who's doing what, and everything, all of the processes really improve. And then asynchronous communication patterns become much better. So you end up documenting a lot of stuff better, because if you're having, instead of having decisions that are just communicated verbally in the hallway and then you walk around and sort of tell each person, you can't do that anymore unless you want to, hop on an airplane, go over there, tell them the decision, and then fly back. But I think that's probably going a little bit too far on the spending money on travel. So you want to have this asynchronous communication pattern, and that improves your local team. That's the thing that I think is really, really interesting about this, is that your local team's communication patterns, even amongst themselves, get better. We used to have a really interesting observation that my teams would have no problems working with one developer in Sydney and one developer in Manila, and they would say that it was really, really effective. But if they had one person working on a team and the other person was 2 desks away, they would say, I can't do this. I have to have them move because they're a whole row away from me now, and I can't communicate. And so we have seating chart fights over who gets to sit next to who, even though they're perfectly willing to work with somebody over in Manila. Humans are weird. And now to probably my most controversial one. Is the idea that you should not use hybrid teams. Either they should all be remote, they should all be co-located, they should all be something, but every one of them should be the same. And I actually heard that kind of in the lobby just before the thing, so I was like, great, thanks for setting that up. And now I got to say that I think that that's wrong. You don't need to need to have it all co-located, all remote, or you need to have it geographic. So everyone on the Manila team should be working on one project, everyone on the Poland team should be working on one project, everybody in the Sydney team should be working on one product, and that's sort of the way that everyone goes. And now, I don't like this. I actually use hybrid teams. And the reason I do is first off, is that I do both co-location and remote, and plus the head office. So we've got people that work from home, we've got people that work primarily from home, we've got people that work in an office in Manila, we've got people that work in the office in Sydney, so we're kind of all over the shop. And the reason is because different team members have different needs. People work differently. Some people like to work from home. Some people like to work from an office. I personally cannot work from home. I hate it. Most of my role is basically walk around talking to people, listening for information, reading, getting information. So if I'm working from home, I'm really not that effective. Also, I suck at compartmentalizing. So if I'm at home and I'm working, then I just, I stay working. I don't ever turn off. So I just don't like doing that. But other people aren't like that. Other people really, really enjoy working from home. I don't know if anybody's been to Manila, but the traffic there is horrendous. And so we've got, people that have, 2.5-hour commutes each way simply because they're over, and they're only like 4 kilometers from the office. But it's just, it's ridiculous. So they work from home quite a bit because it really helps them. And then they come into the office because they like to have that human interaction also. So again, by making sure that you have hybrid teams, you allow people to transfer in and between those teams sort of dynamically. So you can have somebody who will work from the office most time, but occasionally remote, or occasionally from a distributed office. If you have a developer whose family is from where one of your locations are, they might go back and work out of that office for a month just so they can, visit family without having to take a month off. And then it also trains the team to treat distributed employees like full members of the team. This is vital. You don't want to have the distributed team thinking that they're second-class citizens. You definitely want them to believe that they're full members of the team. And by allowing them sort of that same flexibility that they can work from home or that, or from the office, and that's good. And then people working from home understand what are the problems. How do you, when you work from home and you're in a meeting and everybody's doing side talking, when you come back, you're like, wait a minute, we can't do that. I couldn't hear anything. That's not the way we want to do it. So you start to get a lot more empathy for the distributed members. And finally, you can retain talent. At my previous company, we had a developer who got married and his wife didn't have a Australian visa yet, so they had to wait 6 months for it, and the Australian government said both A, she wasn't allowed to come into the country, and B, they had to cohabitate because otherwise they would say it was a marriage of convenience. So he literally had to move out of Australia. So we were able to retain him because he could work remotely for 6 months from New Zealand because apparently they don't care. But allowed us to retain the talent. And our teams are not geocentric, so this is the other big sort of controversial one, is that we actually have on our team in Manila, one person works on the services team, one person works on the financial systems team, one person works on the direct pod team. And what that does is it makes sure that we force communication between the geographic locations. If everybody in Manila was on one team and everybody in Sydney was on a different team, they wouldn't have to talk, and you would get an us versus them mentality. And we prevent that by making sure that people are distributed across teams. So we don't have an us versus them, and it really does encourage cross-geo communications because they have to talk every day. They talk during stand-ups, they talk during work, they pair program across the geographies. And it allows for the flexibility, which is really nice. And the last thing I want to talk about is the idea that you can lower your standards for offshore teams. And this is the only time I'll actually refer to them as offshore, because I think that when you are trying to lower your standards, you're going back to that old model. And this one, I think, for when you're sitting there and you're trying to save a bunch of money and hire, I don't think this one is all that controversial for the audience in this particular room. But if you're going to set up a remote team, you're going to have to fight this against like the non-technical execs. At the company I'm at now, I'll get into the story in a little bit, but basically we've really had to fight to say we need to have higher standards, or we need to maintain our standards across the different teams. So we have the same standard. When we interview for a developer in a foreign location, we have the exact same interviewing process. We tweak it a little bit for just process because of the different ways that we have to use it, because it's a lot more remote because we're interviewing from Sydney to Manila, things like that. But we don't make any allowance for lowering the bar on technical competency. They have to pass the same technical test that the engineers in Sydney do. We don't create a second-tier remote team for scrub work. There used to be one there, and it was awful because all the work they did had to be redone by the team in Sydney anyway. So it not only didn't save us time, it cost us more work, which made it more expensive, so it did the exact opposite of what it was meant to do. So yeah, so it creates a bunch of extra work. It also creates resentment because the team that's having to do not only their own jobs, but the offshore team's jobs also will then leave and go to a place where they don't have to do two jobs, where they can actually just do the one. And you want to make sure that you're giving your distributed teams the same access, training, career advancement, making sure that they're part of the team. And that will really, really help. So what were some of the results? Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'll give you some of the results of both where I'm at now and the place where I was just previously, because I had a much longer tenure at my previous job with working with distributed teams. And of course, it's all sunshine and rainbows. Everything works perfectly, every time. No, it doesn't quite. So one thing is that by splitting the geographic teams, or by splitting the teams geographically, you get increased workload amongst the team leads. They have to sometimes stay late, they have to sometimes wake up early, they've got to invest more into communication, but that's okay, because that's their role, is to lead these teams, and it really, believe it or not, it ends up helping them, and it gives them a little bit of flexibility. We had a team lead whose child was starting school, so they basically said, well, I have to work with the Poland office, so I'll start coming in at noon and leaving at 9 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night. So he's still working the same amount of hours, but now he gets to take his daughter to school in the morning. So it actually adds some flexibility. If you spread the pain, it does mean that more people feel the pain. So you sit there and you try to say, okay, we're going to have an early morning stand-up, and then we're going to have a late afternoon stand-up, and all of a sudden now everybody's kind of slightly irritated about it, but it's still better than sort of pissing off just one. And communication is difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. You can have all the expensive communication tools in the world. It's still easier to lean across the chair and just talk to somebody than it is to talk to somebody in Manila. However, your communication improves when you do learn how to communicate across these time zones. And as much as I've tried, time zones still exist. I have not been able to solve that one. So at my previous company, we went from 0 to 16 distributed employees in just 18 months. So we were able to find the talent that we were looking for. We had no resignations in Manila during the last year I was there. And this is a company or a place that has between 25 to 15% skilled turnover usually. And at my current place at Prospa, we haven't lost anybody in Manila yet either. So we have a lot of retention simply because we treat them like actual adults and actual professional developers, and invest in them and make them feel like they're part of the company. And so we're in the process of scaling that up, which has been going really well. I was actually able to, the old company now does have some retention problems because I've managed to steal a couple away. Because they respect how I run the teams. And finally, we get high levels of job satisfaction. Both locally and distributed teams have it, because we've made a lot of improvements around how we work. We get a lot of flexible work schedules, and it helps us really be flexible. We can attract and retain the talent. When we said, okay, let's allow the team to decide whether or not we're going to go ahead and reorganize and say everyone in Sydney's in one team, everybody in Poland's on another team, overwhelmingly they wanted to go to cross-geo teams because they felt like it made them a part of each of the other offices and allowed them to communicate. And it really does increase the awareness of the problems that face the distributed teams. And I guess for me, the biggest surprise, oops, sorry, one too many. The biggest surprise for me was the impact on the local team, how much the local team's communications and empathy improved over the course of the time working with these distributed teams. So I like to say that in my mind, conventional wisdom may be not all that wise. So thank you very much.
Fantastic.